Welcome, everybody. It's your boy, the Versace Stunner, with another episode of VSW. Thank you. Tonight, we talk a big one. Wrestlemania 7, March 24th, 1991. 16,158 in attendance at the Los Angeles Sports Arena, Los Angeles, California. Another controversial one. This was huge, We were in the midst of the Gulf War. The first Gulf War, that is. And, well, Sergeant Slaughter turned his back on his country, the longtime standing patriot, and decided to join forces with Iraq and represent them, and it was just a battle. You got to remember now, he was champion at the time, as he had defeated the Ultimate Warrior to take that title. So now he was the champion. Hulk Hogan was the challenger coming into WrestleMania 7. And people were wondering, could he do it? They were burning his shirt like as if they were protesters, were burning American flags. It was really intense. As a kid, this was great. I went to a house show around this time. I got to see the match, actually, in a house show. You had Colonel Mustafa, General Adnan, one of them being Iron Sheik. Yeah, you had all this greatness. And Slaughter was in the limelight. You haven't seen and heard much of him, but he returned. He was big in the 80s, but nobody had seen him since 84, really, for WWE. So, he was doing stuff with G.I. Joe, he was doing stuff with this, but when he came back, he turned his back, and it was just a great build-up match for the pay-per-view. But let's go on. There was a lot of matches. You had The Rockers, Shawn Michaels and Maya Janae defeating The Barbarian and Haku with Bobby the Brain Heenan. Classic tag team matchup. The Rockers continuing to shine. Taking it to the top. They're the original, Young Bucks, Hardy Boys, Brothers, whatever you want to call these tag teams now. This was them, the originals. The OGs of the game, The Rockers. Maya Jannetty would go on. He'd have an IC title run, and he just had a lot of issues in his life. HBK going on to do legendary things, as you know. So, it's great going back and seeing them in their old time. Before Shawn Michaels was this big Mr. WrestleMania himself, he was, this tag team partner that would fight sometimes the first match in the show. It's kind of great to see. So, next up, you had British Bulldog defeating Warlord with Slick. This was a very powerhouse match. Both of them powerful, strong, aggressive. British Bulldog had a lot of bulk and power to him. He could wrestle as well. And Warlord he was one of my favorite wrestlers at the time, especially this solo gimmick. I loved his outfit that he would wear. And, these guys would just really just give us a display. Davey Boy Smith breaking out of the Warlord's full Nelson. And that was what enabled him to give him the running power slam and end that match. And that's what's pretty cool, The Warlord was kind of known for that full Nelson. And this is back again when submission moves meant something. Submission were a valid way to win, and people feared them. So, you had The Undertaker with Paul Bearer defeating Jimmy Fly Snuka. This is great. Undertaker's first WrestleMania appearance and first win to start the streak. This was just great. It was a very dominant victory over the veteran Jimmy Fly Snuka. Undertaker being the newbie in the company at the time, he just killed it. He was an airy feeling when he came out back then with Paul Bearer. He was pale, you know. And it was just intense. You know, and at the Survivor Series when he debuted with Brother Love brought him out, it was even, you know, people were like, what is this? The world hadn't seen a gimmick like this yet. There was no really dark gimmicks. This was great. And to see how big he was and how how he could move, that was even more impressive. But yep, this was the WrestleMania that Undertaker debuted. Great match, if you can go back and watch it. Yeah, the Texas Tornado defeating Dino Bravo with Jimmy Malasal, Jimmy Hart. You know, rest in peace, both these guys. Texas Tornado, Kerry Von Erich, you know, was a great solo star. Really up and coming, really doing great things in the WWF at the time. Dino Bravo, legend. You know, he had fought in a few WrestleManias, just a great on the mic, you know, great in the ring. He was a strong man from Canada, you know, and he just, with the mouth of the South behind him, it was just excellent work. And this was a good match, you know, a good mid-card match. You also had Earthquake with Mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart defeating Greg the Hammer Valentine for a little bit while Greg Valentine was going face, or, you know, kind of a tweener. He always kind of was a tweener. You know, Earthquake still kind of dominant, not so much, though, after the loss to Hogan at the 90 SummerSlam. You know, soon he would transition into a tag team wrestler with Typhoon as the National Disasters. You had Virgil with Rowdy Piper defeating Ted $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. This was pretty cool. Virgil now breaking away as, you know, the bodyguard of the $1 Million Man. And he would go on to fight and win. And these people would, you know, they would feud for a little bit. And then Virgil would go on to do his solo career. Not really amounting to much, but he would, however, get out of that gimmick. Ted DiBiase would then later go into some kind of tag, you know, with IRS. And, you know, the rest of it later on would just continue to go and history unfolds. But this was a pretty good feud if it were there at the time. Virgil getting his freedom. It was great. You had the Mountie, with the Mouth of the South versus Tito, and defeating Tito Santana. You know, the Mountie, you know, used to be part of the Rougeau brothers. Jacques Rougeau. Now he's over here solo with the Mountie. He had the great. He was very effective as a solo superstar. He did good things. He had a good feud with the Boss Man. I really just, I liked it. I liked him as a solo star. You then had Junichi Tenryu and Koji Katao defeating Demolition, Smash and Crush with Mr. Fuji. This was a tag team classic matchup. You know, these guys came from Japan. You know, and I guess what they said was, you know, I guess it boiled down to Demolition being rude and just not showing respect for the Japanese wrestlers. And again, this wasn't the original Demolition. It wasn't Smash and Axe. It was Smash and Crush. By this time, it was three of them all going together. So Demolition was kind of on its way out. Soon you would see Smash wrestling solo as the Repo Man. Crush would go solo. And, you know, so forth and so on. You had the Legion of Doom, Animal and Hawk defeating Power and Glory, Hercules and Paul Roma with Slick. Great matchup. Love the Legion of Doom. Hawk and Animal, legends in this game. They make the tag team division what it is today. You know, it's teams like this that really have inspired so many to come out and do what they do. And Power and Glory is a classic matchup. Hercules Hernandez and Paul Roma. I mean, you can't get any better than that. Really just a superstar of tag team action. You have to love it. You have to love it. You have to love it. You then have the blindfold match between Jake the Snake Roberts and the model Rick Martel. This because, the model had sprayed Jake the Snake in the eyes with his perfume, blinding him, so this became a blindfold match. Jake the Snake would go on to defeat Rick the model Martel, but this was a good match for Rick to really showcase what he could do and how he could do it. And this was great. Like I said, the gimmicks were starting to get a little colorful around this time, as they would pretty soon start to transcend in the next few years into the next generation, or new generation. But the Rock and Roll era was still level, but like I said, I remember clearly, you had Rick the Model coming down, this pink attire, with the big spray of cologne, spraying in the air, it was great. He had one of the greatest Boston Crabs, too. But this was a great match with Jake the Snake. It was a good feud. It had a good build-up. You gotta remember, there was only 3 or 4 pay-per-views a year at the time. You had just the majors. So the build-up was on, shows. Yes, they had some weekly shows, Saturday nights and stuff, but the build-up took time, and there was time in between, but it wasn't a pay-per-view every month like it is today. You had the Intercontinental Championship match, the Big Boss Man defeating Mr. Perfect, who was the current champion, by disqualification, meaning the title does not change hands, but the Big Boss Man was victorious. Perfect was a good IC champion. I don't think he was ready to give it up. They weren't ready to have him give it up. Boss Man, though, was starting to, as a solo competitor, starting to take off, so they wanted to give him the victory. It was a good matchup. Should he have gotten the gold? Probably, for a little bit. Maybe, they could have lost it, at the following pay-per-view. Or, at that time there was house shows that, titles changed. And, fans might not even know it. So, there was a lot they could have done with it. It was a good match, though. It was a good IC title match at this event. You had the Nasty Boys this is out for the WWE Tag Team Championship match. You had the Nasty Boys, Brian Knobbs and Jerry Sags, with Jimmy Hart, and they would go on to defeat the Hart Foundation, Bret Hart and Jim the Animal Neidhart, to become the New World Champions. Jimmy Hart kind of turning his back on them a little bit on the Hart Foundation. Classic tag team action again. Nasty Boys, maybe not the most technically sound tag team, but they could wrestle, they could fight, they could do the best with the best of the best of the best to get the crowd going. You had them, you had, you still had a little bit of Demolition, you had the Road Warriors there, Legion of Doom, you had Bushwhackers, you got all these tag teams that were there that just made wrestling great. You had the retirement match, the Ultimate Warrior defeating Randy Macho Man Savage and Queen Sherry, so Macho Man would have to retire. Sad day in wrestling. But at the end, Miss Elizabeth came out at the end and, forgave Randy Savage, and they got back together. It was a very emotional point in time. And it just was a very emotional matchup. Of course, it wasn't the real end of Macho Man Randy Savage, and it was, it was just great. Ultimate Warrior would, kind of disappear, actually, after this himself. So it was kind of the reversal of what would take place. But anyways, and then you had the World Championship match now. Hulk Hogan, the challenger, challenging the biggest traitor the history has ever seen, the Sergeant Slaughter. Huge American Iraqi build-up here, you know. This was using real-life politics to boost the main event of a pay-per-view. And it was pretty big at the time. I remember hating Sergeant Slaughter, you know, as a kid. Hulk Hogan would go on to defeat him and become the champion yet again. You know, making the crowd went wild when that happened, obviously. You know, Slaughter then would go back, to, I believe, to being face. But it was a brutal match. Hogan was bloody by the end of it. And it just was great. Hogan was the American hero in it, of course. And, you know, it just really solidified Hogan's legacy, I think. He always had a legacy. But this would be the time he became he was the first 3-time WWF champion in the history of the WWF at the time. So, I mean, it was a pretty big deal. You know, there was only one big world title. There wasn't all these, you know, other world titles. It was just one, so. You know, this was WrestleMania 7. Was it the best? I don't know. Was it the worst? No. You know, the next few WrestleManias would get a little rocky, get a little bumpy. But they all had their moments. I can't say any of these WrestleManias are bad. They're all my favorite from, like, the early on. Because I watched them as, you know, firsthand. I watched them live on pay-per-view. It wasn't I watched them, you know, 20 years later with a different set of eyes. So, you know, that's how I kind of look at things here. But next up on our list, not today, but later on, we will do WrestleMania 8. That was a wild show. You know, some wild surprises there. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This has been the WrestleMania 7 recap. VSW. I'm your host, Versace Stoner. You can always follow us on Twitter, Versace Stoner 9. Have a great one. Versace Stoner out.